Hello, folks. My name is Dr. Jasjit Singh from the University of Leeds, where I'm an associate professor in the School of Philosophy, Religion and the History of Science. And I'm a sociologist of religion, focusing on the religious lives of Sikhs in diaspora. And today I'm going to talk about some of the recent research I've been doing on Sikh religious authority in the digital world. So I've been looking at the impact of the online environment on Sikhs in diaspora. And in this presentation, I'm just going to talk a bit about some of the research that I've been doing and hopefully getting to think about how the online environment impacts on religion, particularly on religious authority. So just a bit of an overview. The Sikh tradition appeared online quite late compared to other traditions. So you had a variety of Usenet groups and websites emerged in the late 90s up to the early 2000s. And you had a whole proliferation of websites which appeared online all the way through and are still appearing online now. I undertook some research for my PhD when I looked at the role of the internet and the role of the digital arena in religious transmission. So I was asking, how do young Sikhs in particular learn about religion through the online environment? Because it was quite a new phenomena in the early 2000s, and I was looking at how this impacted on various ideas, particularly on religious authority. But what I found was that the online environment was opening up conversations. The young Sikhs that I interviewed and surveyed, so I did an online survey and I got responses from that, and my respondents told me what they use the internet for. And you could see from this list, which is in an academic article, that they used it to discuss taboo subjects or subjects that they maybe wouldn't be able to discuss in a institution or in their families. They could ask questions about the tradition, about the Sikh tradition. They could explore different practices. So what's happened now is that young Sikhs and Sikhs in general are much more aware of the diversity in the tradition than they would have been before the internet, when you kind of grow up in the family and you're born and raised in a particular kind of Sikhi. Now, because of the internet, people are aware of all the different kinds of Sikh practice. They use the internet to access repositories of religious materials, particularly Kirtan. So Kirtan is devotional singing of the writings of the gurus, which takes place in gurdwaras and takes place in homes, and is really, really significant because the Sikh gurus wrote their compositions were written in rags, which are musical measures which convey particular emotions. So music and Kirtan is fundamental to the Sikh tradition, and if any of you visited a Gurdwara, you'll hear Kirtan taking place. So Kirtan was a real draw to the particular websites in the early years, where people wouldn't then have to buy CDs and cassettes and could actually download Kirtan from the internet. So that was really important. Another important aspect, and I'll talk about this a bit later, is the emergence of English translations of Sikh scriptures. So in diaspora, in outside the Punjab, Sikhs increasingly, speak less Punjabi. Obviously, most people are speaking the language of the country in which they live. So many Sikhs find it difficult to engage with the Sikh scriptures, with the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and to understand what the gurus were writing. So the digital arena, the online environment, led to the emergence of a number of translations, and I'll talk about these later as well. But this became very, very important for Sikhs as well. So there's an important aspect there then of language online and how the internet can be used to facilitate understandings of different languages. Sikhs were using the online environment to obtain daily guidance from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So every day, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is opened at a random page, and the top left composition, Shabad of the Guru, is seen as the thought or guidance of the day. Now, the opening, the Hukamnama that's taken at the Bar Sahib, at the Golden Temple, is then sent around the world, and that's kind of seen as the message of the day. So Sikhs could have kind of engaged with the Guru Granth Sahib a lot more easily than they could before the internet, when they would actually have to visit a Gurdwara physically and ask somebody to open the Guru Granth Sahib themselves. So they could find out about Sikh events, access recordings, purchase resources, so books, the 5Ks, for instance, and also understand the legal position of Sikh articles of faith in their particular areas. So the internet led to a whole host of different tools and resources, and it allowed the Sikh community to engage with all these things much easier than they could have before. I remember back in the day, you'd have to, you know, you'd have to write to bookshops in Amritsar, and then send them a check, and then ask them to send the books across. Obviously, this was all before Amazon took off, and now things are much more easy. So it's facilitated a lot more engagement with different kinds of knowledge. So you saw the emergence of websites, and then obviously the Web 2.0, so social media emerges, blogging, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is interesting because there were some articles about Sikhs on Wikipedia, and then Sikhs themselves created their own version called Sikhi Wiki. YouTube emerged, which has enabled, videos, and I'll talk about these later as well. But obviously, there's lots of different ways of spreading information now: YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. There were Yahoo groups and Google groups, which emerged in the early 2000s, and which are still there. Obviously, Twitter and TikTok. So there's been a whole emergence of different kinds of tools. And what's interesting is to examine how these different tools are used to transmit religion, and particularly generational differences as well. So which kinds of generations, which age ranges use these different kinds of tools, and engage with them regularly. So I'm going to keep this quite short as a short video. I thought I'd focus on authority because lots of people have said that the internet impacts on religious authority, and Heidi Campbell, who's a scholar of digital religion, she talks about 4 specific types of religious authority, and says that we need to think about how the online environment has impacted on these particular types of religious authority. So the first one she talks about is religious hierarchy. So how has the online environment impacted on religious hierarchy? So what it's done is it's facilitated the emergence of a number of online religious authorities, particularly those who are able to present religious discourse in English. So there's now lots of YouTube channels of young Sikhs born and bred in the UK who present Sikh teachings in English. Interestingly, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there weren't many of these guys. There was a group of Sikh converts in America who presented videos in English. But since then, Sikhs in diaspora, Sikhs in the UK, have started producing their own kind of teachings in English, and lots of Sikhs engage with these because they're easier to understand. The people who present them can use contemporary examples as well. So this has had a bit of a yes, it's definitely impacted on religious hierarchy, because your traditional authorities who would have been in the Gurdwaras mainly teaching in Punjabi aren't as important for many young Sikhs now as these new authorities online. So it's facilitated the emergence of this new kind of engagement. Also, the internet's impacted on religious structures. So again, whereas previously you would have to wait for edicts and advice from hierarchical structures from the SGPC in Amritsar, now there's a lot more grassroots activism around particular topics, particularly on Twitter. So this often bypasses traditional structures. So individual Sikhs can mobilize around a cause using particular hashtags. And you see a lot of this mobilization taking place. And then you see traditional authorities often coming in at a later stage to participate in this. So, the online environment's facilitated a lot more grassroots engagement than previously. Ideology, as I said before, the online environment has impacted on ideology, and that Sikhs are now much more aware of diversity in ideological diversity, understanding different kinds of practice, understanding different types, different groups, which they wouldn't have been aware of before. So it's opened up a lot more awareness of diversity within the Sikh tradition. And finally, I want to talk about text. So software has been established and emerged, digital software, which helps Sikhs engage with the words of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which are fundamental to Sikh practice. because these are the actual words of the gurus. And this piece of software here, Sikh to the Max, has become particularly prevalent, where if you go to Gurdwaras, you'll often see screens where Sikh to the Max is projected. You see translations of the words of the guru, and you know, this has led to a lot of engagement. Now, in my surveys, people have said this is brilliant. It's allowed them to understand the words of the guru, although some have actually recognized that there are issues with translation. So the most regular translation used is that of a guy called Dr. Sant Singh Khalsa, who created the first ever online translation in the format of a PDF document and a Word document. And what I found when I was analyzing English translations is that whereas previously there were lots of books available and you could actually, you know, read a book and compare and contrast different translations, because of this one translation became so readily available, many of the apps that are available on phones use the same translation, you know. So what this means is that whereas previously there was more diversity in translations, you can compare and contrast translations, and you could take the time to understand what particular translations meant and their perspectives. The fact that it's one translation now, although this is being challenged now that this has been raised, I raised this in an academic article in 2018. There are people now trying to create create translations which are kind of put together by consensus. So given the emergence in online tools, this reliance on one translation is being challenged, but for a long time, this was the only translation available. So I'll stop there. So some of the questions I thought I'd raise in this particular video are: think about what role the internet plays in religious transmission and learning. What can people do now that they couldn't do before? How do different digital tools present different types of information about religion? So TikTok versus Twitter versus WhatsApp versus Yahoo groups. Are there different types of religious authority? Think about issues of translation. So what might be lost when simply imposing meanings from English and Christianity to non-Christian worldview? So, for example, the word Gurdwara has the word guru in it, which emphasizes the importance of the guru for Sikhs, unlike Sikh temple, which doesn't. So you lose a lot. You lose a lot in translation. So I think it's often better to try and use the actual terms used by particular communities to understand the nuances behind those terms and not go for this kind of one-to-one translation. And finally, how might family background and religious affiliation impact on online engagement? I hope that was useful. You can find me on Twitter if you've got any questions. Thank you very much for listening.